Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming to us from. I'm Steve Goldbach. I'm Deloitte's Chief Strategy Officer, and it's really great to be here at Reuters Strategic Marketing 2021. I'm joined by two of my good friends and longtime colleagues and collaborators, Amelia Dunlop and Geoff Tuff. Amelia is the Chief Experience Officer of Deloitte Digital and the author of the forthcoming book, Elevating the Human Experience. And Geoff is a senior member of our innovation team and the Future of Energy leader at Deloitte. And he and I together authored a couple of books, Detonate and the book that we just released, Provoke. We are here today in a manner that I will describe as live-ish. We are not obviously live together with you today, and that's because one of us had a long planned vacation to Europe before this opportunity came to us, but we wanted to not have all three of us together because we thought it'd be truly fun to do. So we're going to try to do it live-ish by doing it all in one take without any edits, and we'll see how that plays out. We're going to talk about the topic of productive discomfort and why that's critical right now for chief marketers and the times that we live in. So why don't we start with a question for you, Amelia? What is productive discomfort?
Thanks, Steve. So I think so many things are making us feel uncomfortable right now in this sort of hybrid world. And one of the things I write about in my book is that productive discomfort is when we are willing to engage with our biases, our blind spots, and our privilege without sort of turning away. And when we do that, we have the opportunity to actually provoke the kind of future that we want to see. And the reason I think that's important is when we think about all the people for whom the system may not have been kind of created, who may have been historically marginalized, they're often told to lean into the system. And I don't think it's our responsibility to lean in. I think it's our responsibility to deconstruct that system, engage with the productive discomfort, and then redesign it. So that's why I thought it'd be good to talk about productive discomfort.
So I have two reactions to that, Amelia. My first reaction is every single time I hear you talk about both your book and what you believe, it's obvious that we come from the same sort of genetic, or at least genetic experience background. Why don't I put it that way? Because I think there's a lot of connection, a lot of overlap between what Steve and I write about and talk about and what you do. And I'm really excited to see your book come out into the world and hopefully explore some of these ideas together. My favorite part of what you just said, though, is the notion of engaging. It is so important that we proactively engage with not just the discomfort around us, but the change that's coming around us in a way that we can take action using muscles that we haven't necessarily built over the previous years of our experience. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that as we get into this.
And Geoff, why is action the path to dealing with uncertainty at this moment? Why is action a better strategy?
Well, so I'm not going to take a half hour to expound on all the ideas in Provoke, but I'll basically.
I know you could.
And you know me all too well. So the basic condition, as you guys have heard me talk about before, the basic condition we're all living in today as a society, as a group of business executives, is we have shifted from a time in both general human history, but also business history, which has been governed primarily by linear change. It's been the reality of how business has grown up over the course of the last century or so, to one that is increasingly governed by exponential change. And when I say increasingly, I mean that's been accelerating over the course of the last decade or so, and it's definitely been present in the last 3 or 4 years. What's happened as we've shifted from a time of linear change to one of exponential change is that we have moved from a world in which the job of business leaders is to mitigate risk, to take risk out of making decisions, to one in which the job is increasingly about facing uncertainty head on. And the reality is risk is measurable and therefore manageable. Uncertainty is by definition not measurable and it's not manageable. And you can't actually look at what is by definition retrospective information, data, to make decisions. The only way you can add contours to uncertainty and to try to understand what's happening in the realm of uncertainty is to go provoke a reaction, go do something in the market, take a small step forward and see what happens. That is at the heart of taking action. And it's the only way that we as leaders, whether uncertainty is leading to discomfort or the inability to move forward in the face of change, it's the only way that we can actually impact the world that is changing faster than we've ever seen it before.
Amelia, doesn't that concept of taking action make people feel pretty uncomfortable? Isn't that
Totally.
part of it?
It does, but what I love about what Geoff is saying is that we're either going to let the change happen to us, or we're going to provoke the kind of change that we'd like to see.
Yeah. Part of what we've talked about is that people oftentimes equate the status quo with not very risky, because it doesn't feel risky, right? But actually, in reality, doing the same thing you've always done is incredibly risky, but doing something different feels very risky, but it actually isn't very risky in a time of exponential change. So, Amelia, can you say a little bit more about, how you see the chief marketing officer fitting into this equation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I'm aware of is, and others may have seen it, just the recent articles about the explosion of new chief titles, right? That it used to be the CMO was the new game in town, but it's chief experience officers, chief customer officers, customer experience officers. I think this is all a good thing, because I do think it's an acknowledgement that the focus on not just marketing, sort of the one-way communication out to the customer, but all the touch points and the sort of the journey for that customer really matter. So I think what we're seeing is that pivot from kind of one-way marketing to the multi sort of touch point experience journey.
And Amelia, I want to come back to you with another question. I know in a lot of your thinking and writing, you talk about the importance of the human experience, and in a lot of the dealing I've had historically over the last 20 years with chief marketing officers, it's been about the customer or the consumer. Why the shift from consumer and customer to human? What's the important distinction that you're trying to draw out there?
Well, we didn't wake up this morning as customers, Steve, right? We're not employees. And so there has been the focus on the customer experience. There's been a focus also on the employee experience. But like Geoff said, I think what we want to do is really focus on the things that unite us, and that we wake up as humans. And what we're trying to do is bring more of a human-centered design perspective on these humans that we're trying to serve. And I talk a lot about, as you pointed out, around elevating that experience, because as organizations, we have the opportunity to make things just a little bit better or a little bit worse in people's lives.
And Geoff, how might taking a human-centered approach help CMOs recognize important shifts in the world, or phase changes, as I know you like to call them?
Yeah, so let me just set up the notion of a phase change, and I'll come back to the question of where human beings fit in the whole thing. So as Steve, all too well, one of the ideas we put out in Provoke is that in the face of uncertainty, the leaders who are best positioned to impact the future in a way that creates advantage for them are those that can actually recognize the phase change earlier than others and position themselves to be able to move through it in a way with purpose. Now, what we mean by the phase change is any uncertainty. Some uncertainties just kind of go away. They look like interesting trends, but they never really happened, and they disappear into the ether. But some uncertainties actually do eventually resolve into eventualities. And so there's a moment in time, or an extended moment in time, where an uncertainty will change from being a question of if it's going to happen to being a question of when it's going to happen. You may not know everything about it. You may not know the landing point. You may not know the rate of change, but you go through what we call the phase change from an if to a when. It's really important, I think, for this whole audience and for all CMOs to recognize that as essentially the most senior executives with a direct plug into the market, they are better positioned than anyone to recognize that phase change. They're better positioned to lead the company towards saying when certain uncertainties that impact their business are going to resolve from being an if to a when. And the only way they can do that is to pay attention to humans. A lot of the time people think that CMOs are paying attention primarily to the human beings that they're paying attention to are primarily in the market as customers or consumers. But if you believe that the locus of human experience sits with, whether you call them the chief marketing officer or the chief experience officer or what have you, that same ethos of being able to pay attention to customer and customer behavior can be pulled through any value chain, all the way through to all the human beings that make up what we do as a business. It could be customers, it could be suppliers, it could be employees, it could be partners, it could be regulators. So that's why I think of the CMO role, or the Chief Experience Officer role, the folks in this forum, why they're so critically important to being the provocateur within their organization.
I love that you mentioned, Geoff, the just the idea of ethos, and also, you know, I think it's important to talk about the fact that also increasingly the CMO is responsible for the purpose of the organization, and how is that brand showing up to the world, but also more importantly, how is it authentically living that experience internally. So another trend that we're seeing for CMOs.
Amelia, let me come back to you. How can CMOs create positive, productive discomfort in their organizations so to get their organizations able to create a broader peripheral vision to see some of these trends emerging? What's one way that they can do it? And then maybe Geoff will ask you the same question.
Yeah.
Oh, it's always hard to do the silver bullet, right? I don't think there's a silver bullet. I'll tell you some of the things that I've observed. I think one of the first things is obviously acknowledging, right? So I talked about just acknowledging biases and blind spots. And so one of the things that we've done is, use the tools that are around ethnography and human-centered design to actually study places where we have biases, or where we have challenges in the system today that we'd like to change, whether that's the junior Black practitioner experience, or women's development, or just where there's particular problems that we feel like we need to engage with. So I think one thing we can do is start to use some of the traditional marketing tools on these populations, so that we can challenge our assumptions and what we think we already know to create change.
Geoff, how about you?
Yeah, so again, heavily connected ideas, I think, between how I think about this and how Amelia does. But the key, and I'll keep on coming back to this point around exponentials and uncertainty, but the key in these times, as we're hit with accelerating changes, we have to have a massively wider peripheral vision for what's happening in the world. We can't just pay attention to our industry, because sometimes competitors come from completely different industries. We can't pay attention to trends that have historically been important, because sometimes other trends become more important. And what we found is that even with the most, I would say, advanced executives who understand that need, they naturally have their field of vision narrowed by the same biases that Amelia is talking about. And we explore a lot of those biases in Provoke that are pulled directly from the domain of behavioral economics, whether it's, for example, the availability bias, where human beings are just naturally wired to place a higher importance on data that's readily available, or the status quo bias, where human beings are just generally inclined to run away from change, because that feels like loss if something changes, and we are, as human beings, naturally loss averse. And we obviously explore a whole range of those different things. The way you remove those biases, and the best way you can actually expand that peripheral vision again, is to introduce cognitive diversity onto your teams. And cognitive diversity comes from real diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's where I think if you have that as a fundamental operating condition, then you can do the types of things that Amelia is talking about to elevate the human experience and actually make not only create a better source of advantage as you look towards the future, but make the experience all along the way for all involved a better one.
So I'm going to wrap us up here, because we're coming close to our allotted time, or at least we are on my iPhone timer. And I wanted to share just a few last thoughts. So one is, we live in a world of incredible uncertainty today, and CMOs sit right at the epicenter of it, because you've got you're at the coalface of everything you're trying to do from your customers, and your customers wake up every day as human beings, and understanding what drives and motivates them as human beings is first and foremost what you've got to do, and understanding deeply what their needs are, and trying to make their worlds a little bit better starts, you will only see that if you confront the biases that you have on your team and widen your peripheral vision. And the way to get at that is through some productive discomfort on your team. And one of the great ways to create that is to create a much more diverse team, but you've got to also be inclusive, right? You won't get the benefit from diversity if not everyone feels like they've got an authentic voice and can bring their authentic selves to work. So I wanted to leave us at that. All of us would be really enthusiastic about engaging with you in social media. Probably the best way to reach all three of us is through LinkedIn, because you can find us with just our names. I'm sure you can also search us, but we do encourage you to pick up both books. So that those are, again, Amelia's book is Elevating the Human Experience, and Geoff and my book is Provoke. Amelia's book, I think, is coming out shortly after this will be released, and Geoff and my book is out and was lucky enough to make a couple bestseller lists. So we are grateful for the opportunity. We hope you engage with us on social media, and thank you to Reuters Strategic Marketing 2021 for having us here. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.